Coming up on the Watchman, we're joined for an exclusive interview by Israel's Minister of Strategic Affairs, Ron Dermer. He's also Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's top advisor, and he's here to break down why Israel must win its war in Gaza and why it matters to you. That's next. Hey folks, Erick Stakelbeck here. Welcome to the Watchman newscast. Israel's Minister for Strategic Affairs, Ron Dermer, is literally in the room by the Prime Minister's side when major decisions are being made about Israel's future and the current Gaza war. He sat down with us for an exclusive and wide-ranging interview. And folks, we covered a variety of topics. Number one, of course, the Gaza war. What comes next? Will Israel enter Rafa and clear out that last bastion of Hamas terrorists? And does a great northern war loom with Hezbollah in Lebanon? Plus, what about those calls for a Palestinian state in the wake of the October 7th massacre? And what about Americans and really all friends of Israel, Christians around the world? What can we do to stand with the world's one and only Jewish state in its time of greatest need? Now, my interview with Ambassador Dermer can be seen on my brand new show launching tonight, March 25th, Stakelbeck Tonight on TBN. We've been telling you about it now for weeks, airing every weeknight, Monday through Friday, 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time, and then again at 10:30 p.m. Eastern Time. On tonight's inaugural episode, we've got Minister Ron Dermer. We've also got a great on-the-ground report from Israel's biblical heartland, Judea and Samaria, with our TBN Israel correspondent, Yair Pinto. You won't want to miss it. Stakelbeck Tonight, TBN, 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time, starting today. In the meantime, let's go to my interview with Israel's Minister of Strategic Affairs, Ron Dermer. Minister Dermer, thanks so much for joining us. Hey, there's a major offensive looming in Rafa. The IDF has made great gains throughout Gaza, but Hamas's last bastion of resistance seems to be Rafa, and yet much of the world community is opposing that potential Israeli move into that city. Minister, why is it so important for the IDF to enter Rafa and finish the job to achieve the goal of destroying Hamas?
Well, it's great to be on your show, Eric. I understand it's your first show. We've done that before, and I wish you much success in the coming years with this show. What I'll tell you about Rafah, and you said most of the world is against Israel finishing off these last battalions. I have news for you, Eric. Most of the world was against Israel finishing off the 1st battalion when we went in on the ground, and a lot of people were opposed to us doing it. They said, well, why don't you just deal with this by the air? Why don't you just take out some top officials? People have to understand, we were not attacked by a terror organization, Israel, on October 7th. We were attacked by a terror army. They have about 30,000 fighters, 30,000 terrorists. That's just Hamas. Islamic Jihad, which is their partner, has 5,000 to 10,000 terrorists. So that's around 40,000. They're the ones, 3,000 of them streamed over our borders on October 7th and raped our women and burnt our children alive and killed parents in front of their children and children in front of their parents and did the most horrific things to the Jews that were perpetrated against us since the Holocaust. So despite what the world thinks or doesn't think, Israel's not going to have a terrorist army on our border. We're not going to suffer pogroms. You know, we fought wars in this country, and unfortunately that will probably happen in the future. We suffer terror attacks. That will happen in the future, but we're not going to suffer pogroms in this country. And we set out after October 7th, the Israeli government, with massive support from the people of Israel, to take out this terrorist army in Gaza. And that's exactly what we're going to do. And we started doing it soon after, about 3 weeks later, after an air campaign. And then we started to move in on the ground. And we have systematically dismantled Hamas's military capabilities. There were 24 battalions on October 7th. There are about 5.5 that are left. 4 of them are in the southern tip of the Gaza Strip, called Rafah, which borders Egypt. And that's really, as you said, Hamas's last bastion. And the idea that Israel is simply going to not take out the remaining terrorist army, essentially, in Gaza, which is around a quarter of their force, and we're just going to walk away is ridiculous. Of course we're going to go and finish the job. That's what we have to do. You wouldn't leave a quarter of the Nazi army intact and just sort of walk away. And I think we had another minister who said, well, you don't take out 80% of a fire. You know, you have firefighters come in, destroy 80% and leave 20% and just hope for the best. So we have to go finish the job. We hope that we can stay on the same page as the United States as we move forward. I'm going to be going to Washington for discussions with that this week. And I hope we'll be able to find common ground. We have in the past during these 5 months. But we'll do our best to find that common ground. But if not, this is a matter of life and death for the state of Israel. And it's key to securing our future. And we're committed to doing just that. We're going to go and destroy and dismantle Hamas's terrorist army. That doesn't mean that what our goal in this war is to kill every Hamas terrorist in Gaza. We'd obviously like to do it, but that could take years, much even longer than that. But what we're not going to do is allow them to have an army. And I had a senior American official came here a couple months ago and told our war cabinet, you know, Hamas is an idea and you can't destroy an idea. And I said in response, you know, Nazism is an idea. And there are still Nazis in Charlottesville that are running around with tiki torches that they got from Bed Bath & Beyond, but they don't have a state called Germany. ISIS is an idea. And there are people throughout the Middle East, places in Europe, and even bedrooms in the United States where the black flag of ISIS probably flies or is pinned against the wall. Yeah. But they don't have a caliphate in Iraq and Syria. To deny territory to a terror organization makes a huge difference. It's one thing for a terror organization to run around with small groups of people and the dangers that they can pose. But when you give terrorists a state, it's orders of magnitude a greater problem. And what Israel is committed to do is to take out this terrorist army and to end Hamas's rule in Gaza and ensure that Gaza never poses a threat to the security of Israel and, of course, to bring our hostages home.
Yeah, and by the way, Minister, people need to know that Hamas leaders have made very clear that if they are to live to fight another day, they will reconstitute and attempt to launch more October 7th style attacks. A second point, over 100 Israeli hostages who were dragged into captivity on October 7th remain in Hamas captivity. I know negotiations are ongoing on that front. That's an issue many of our viewers have been concerned about. Any updates there on the hostages?
Well, we were able to do an initial hostage deal, which got 110 hostages out, 80 of our citizens, and there were some foreign workers who Hamas had also kidnapped and brought in to Gaza. We had a couple of rescue operations. One person was rescued very early in the war. We had an incredibly heroic and daring operation about a month ago where we rescued another 2 hostages. But I think it's clear that to get a large number of hostages, you're probably going to have to do a deal. And we're seeing if we can get there with a deal. I mean, we've made clear that we're not prepared to end the war. Hamas would like to end the war as part of that deal. So we have to sort of square that circle. There are other issues that are on the table. We've had negotiators in Doha, in Qatar, over the last few days, and to try to get a back and forth and to see if we can get a deal. But, you know, you're dealing with a terror organization on the other side. So
it's not an honest broker, to say the least.
Yeah, no, they're terrorists, and we appreciate the efforts of the United States because you have Americans also who are being held hostage. By the way, you had dozens of Americans who were killed on October 7th who were dual citizens, and you have Americans who are being held hostage right now in Gaza. We hope that we can get a deal. I would just say I'm cautiously optimistic, but because we're dealing with Hamas, I think you don't know. And I think a lot of this should not be discussed on the air about how you're going to negotiate a deal, because then it could blow up before it actually happens. And what we would like to do is bring all these people home, and the sooner the better. Sure.
There are cries from some, even in the U.S. Congress, that Israel is not observing international humanitarian law in its Gaza operation. Minister, I've been on the ground with the IDF over the years. I've seen the extraordinary lengths the Israel Defense Forces go to avoid civilian casualties. Can you talk about that a bit more, that sometimes even Israeli soldiers are put at risk in their attempts to save civilians in places like Gaza?
Yeah, I want to talk about it, but first I'd ask all Americans watching us now to think about what their country would do if on a single day a terrorist army would have streamed across your border, killed 50,000 Americans, because that would be the American equivalent. You're about 40 times the size of Israel's population. We had 1,200 people murdered, so it'd be around 50,000 people murdered. And then imagine that terror organization took hostage 10,000 Americans and went back over their border and then decided that they're going to fire rockets throughout the United States. What do you think the United States would do? How do you think the United States would fight that war? And everybody should be honest exactly what America should do, and then look at what Israel has done. Now, remember, we're not fighting a war thousands of miles away. We're fighting a war literally yards away, right over our border, just as be close to your border. But imagine your country's about 1/500th the size of the United States. And right over your border is this terror army that you're trying to take out. How do you think you'd fight that war? Think about it. Think about what America has done in the past, what it did after the attack in Pearl Harbor, what it did in fighting against Germany, on air raids and bombing and carpet bombing. Israel's not doing all that. What Israel has done is, I think, something that no other military has ever done. And they've never faced the situation that we've faced, where you've had this kind of urban warfare, where you have an underground terror tunnel network, a labyrinth of tunnels underground. No one has faced this. You know, the United States fought in Mosul, which, again, thousands of miles away. But you fought in Mosul. It took you 9 months. I think there were 4,000 terrorists in Mosul. We have 10 times that many in Gaza. And I think you killed 10,000 civilians. That's the estimate. So it was around 3 to 1. Let's look at what Israel has done. The numbers, if you believe the Hamas health ministry, which I would not believe their numbers at all because it's a propaganda arm of Hamas, but you know what? Let's say there were 30,000. We have killed about 12,000 terrorists that we know of already in Gaza. Okay, so now in the worst case scenario, you're talking about a ratio of 1.5 to 1. My view is it's probably close to 1 to 1 because, remember, a lot of those deaths in Gaza are happening because when Hamas is firing rockets at us, around 20% of those rockets land inside the Gaza Strip. They kill their own people inside the Gaza Strip, and all of those are added to those numbers. You remember, Eric, about 4 weeks ago, there was an aid convoy that was going to the northern part of the Gaza Strip, and all of these people rushed to the convoy, and in that bedlam, you had a lot of people who were killed, you had people who were run over by trucks, you had people who died in a stampede. Israel had virtually nothing to do with it, and we did, investigation afterwards, and we think maybe it was 4 or 5 people who had approached the tank who were hurt by Israeli soldiers, but over 100 were hurt by Palestinians. Well, that number will just be added to the Palestinian Ministry of Health, and Israel will be accused again. What Israel has done is unprecedented, and it's not what I'm telling you. John Spencer teaches urban war at West Point. I think it's a pretty serious place. And he says no country has done this. And you even had David Petraeus, General Petraeus, who came here, and he said no country has had to deal with this stuff. So I think Israel has taken care that no country has of getting civilians out of harm's way. And I will just give you an example, and hopefully you will discuss this on your show. We are still engaged in a military operation in Shifa Hospital, which is in the northern part of the Gaza Strip. As of right now, when we're doing this interview, we have 180 terrorists who have been killed inside that hospital. We have hundreds of terrorists who've been arrested. We have 0 civilian casualties, 0 as of today, okay? And we still have about another 100, maybe 150 or 200 terrorists that are still holed up there, and we're continuing to do our operations with our special forces. So the accusations against Israel are baseless. I think it's a demonization of Israel. It's to rush the judgment of Israel, and I hope that people don't buy into it. I hope they find out the facts for themselves, and when all the dust clears, Eric, when all the dust clears, people are going to look back and say, wow, I cannot believe that the IDF went through this hornet's nest of Palestinian terrorism with this underground terror tunnel network that they did, and they took such great care to keep civilians out of harm's way. Mind you, every single civilian life that is lost is a tragedy. It's a tragedy even in the most legitimate warfare that you can possibly imagine. But the ones who are responsible for that tragedy, that's Hamas, that uses their hospitals, that uses their mosques, that uses their schools, that uses people's homes. They use them as terror sites. They use their own people as human shields. As the Prime Minister of Israel said, for them, this use of human shields is a strategy. For us, it's a tragedy. For them, it's a strategy. And what I've seen in this war is that what I expected, I actually said it right out of the gate after October 7th, that everyone was going to be with Israel and we were victims. But when those pictures started and Hamas was going to use its people and human shields, and we have to go with the precise action that we take, but even the most precise action will have civilian casualties. The whole world will start turning against Israel, and that's exactly what's happened. But here's the thing, Eric. Israel is determined to achieve victory, and that's where we're going, and because we have no choice. There is no future for this country unless we take out that organization in Gaza based on what they did on October 7th, and we are determined to secure our future.
And Minister, I was in Israel just a few weeks ago. Exactly what you're saying is what I saw. The unity and resilience among the people of Israel was really incredible to see, including in the north. Hey, we've got some 80,000 Israelis evacuated from those northern communities along the Lebanon border as Hezbollah looms, firing rockets on a practically daily basis. Minister, how can that threat be dealt with? It seems to be unsustainable to have this Iran-backed terror army in the form of Hezbollah perched on Israel's northern border.
You're right, and it's important that you mentioned Iran because Iran is the axis. They're the mothership behind all of this, and they've got their Hezbollah in the north, and they've got Hamas in the south, and they've got the Houthis in the Straits, in the approach to the Red Sea, the Bab el-Mandeb Straits, and they have Shia militias in Iraq, and they're attacking Americans dozens of times. They're attacking Israel. And what our goal in the war is since October 7th, is we need to change the security situation in the south vis-a-vis Hamas through a war. We are trying to change the security situation in the north without a full-scale war towards vis-a-vis Hezbollah. And you're right, there has been a back and forth. There have been skirmishes all the time on our northern border, almost every day. Basically every day there is firing back and forth. And right now we have taken a position of what we call active deterrence, meaning trying to prevent them from attacking us. When they do, we have punched back very hard, and we have taken action to start destroying their terrorist infrastructure that they set up on their borders and then different personnel that they have there. But we hope, Eric, that we can resolve this issue diplomatically. We hope that we could do that, and there could be a process which can push basically the terrorist force of Hezbollah away from our border. They have a force like the force, actually better trained than the force that Hamas had on October 7th, which is called the Nukba force. Hezbollah has a similar force called the Radwan force. So we need to push them back away from our border. We need to get people who have anti-tank weapons back away from our border, several kilometers north of our border, so that we can return around 80,000 to 100,000 Israelis who basically have had to leave their homes and have been out of their homes for 5 months. Now, we're determined to return them from their homes. No country will accept the fact that you're going to have all their border communities leave. We're going to bring our people back. We hope to do it diplomatically, and we hope the United States and others, maybe France, can be partners in trying to achieve a diplomatic solution. But if not, we'll have to achieve it in other ways, because you are quite right. You cannot tolerate this situation indefinitely from continuing. So hopefully it'll be diplomatic, and I hope they understand what happened in Gaza could very well happen to them. Hopefully that has sunken in. And I hope we'll be able to resolve this diplomatically. But if not, Israel will have no choice but to use military might in order to return our citizens back to the north and keep them safe.
Are you surprised that in the aftermath of October 7th, the worst massacre of the Jewish people since the Holocaust, calls for a Palestinian state around the world have actually intensified? Why is that a bad idea right now, these calls for a Palestinian state? And Minister, I mentioned I was in Israel just a few weeks ago. Look, that's not on anyone's mind right now, it seems to me, in Israel. It seems that these calls for a Palestinian state at this moment are completely tone deaf.
I agree with you. First of all, it didn't surprise me. A key to life, Eric, is low expectations. So it didn't surprise me. I mean, after the Holocaust, 6 million Jews were murdered, and we had about a half century where it was politically incorrect in the West to go after Jews. I think that changed around 20 years ago, and you've seen this anti-Semitism over the last few months since the war had. I think it was days after October 7th, where people in Sydney, Australia, were calling to gas the Jews. So I'm not surprised that sympathy for the Jewish people ends pretty fast, particularly when we move from being victims and simply taking blows to actually coming out on our way to victory. And as you see Israel get closer and closer to victory, you see more and more people come out against Israel to prevent that from happening. But, you know, it's not going to work. As for a Palestinian state, I think it's a terrible idea in the wake of October 7th to even discuss the issue of a Palestinian state, because it would be the greatest reward for terrorism in history. We don't want a single Palestinian a year from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 20 years from now to think that October 7th actually advanced their cause, that it was the violence and the murder and the mayhem and the rape and the atrocities that were perpetrated that allowed them to propel and catapult their national movement forward. That is a very bad idea and will ensure that the precisely wrong message goes to the Palestinians. What the message that the Palestinians have to understand is that you have to actually move towards peace with Israel. You have to educate your people to peace. You have to stop teaching your children to murder Jews. You have to stop glorifying the murder of Jews. You have to stop paying terrorists who murder Jews. When those things change, then you can start talking about peace in the future and what a final settlement will work. And I want to tell you something else. I understand the Palestinian national strategy because I think it's important for your viewers to understand it. And this is not Hamas, which is part of Palestinian politics. Unfortunately, it's a huge part. They're committed to Israel's destruction. They don't really care that much about a Palestinian state. Maybe they'll accept it for 5 seconds on their path to sort of wiping out Israel and turning the whole region into one giant caliphate. I'm talking about the other part of the Palestinian national movement, which is represented by the Palestinian Authority, President Abbas, who sits in Ramallah. Understand something. So tell you a story. 20 years ago, I'm watching television, and a leading Palestinian spokeswoman was being interviewed right after a terrible terror attack that happened in Jerusalem. And the interviewer said to this woman, said, you know, you're never going to get a state, a Palestinian state, unless you fight terror and make peace with Israel. And what she said was very interesting. She said, no, the issue of Palestinian state and peace with Israel, those are two separate things. We deserve a state because we're a people with a right of self-determination. That's why we deserve a state. Whether we decide to make peace with Israel is another story. So what the Palestinians want to do is have a state not to end the conflict with Israel, not part of a peace agreement with Israel. They want a state to continue the conflict and continue on the path to destroying Israel. That's why I, as a minister in the government, when I meet foreign ministers and other officials, I say, look, we can have a debate about the two-state solution, yes or no, but I ask you as somebody who supports a two-state solution, don't separate the issue of statehood from peace. And you know what they all tell me, Eric? They say, of course not. You can't do that. But then when I ask them, well, then why are you talking about recognizing a Palestinian state unilaterally? And then there's no answer. It's almost that either they haven't thought one step ahead, or they don't care, or it's some virtue signaling, or it's an attempt to respond to domestic politics to say, here, this forced solution. Look, I'll tell you, Eric, we have an opportunity now to begin a real peace process. And a real peace process would mean the de-radicalization of Palestinian society. That has to happen. Because when you have children who are being raised to murder Jews, when you have a society that is glorifying the murder of Jews, that celebrates the attack on October 7th, the most disturbing number for me on October 7th was not simply the 1,200 Jews who were murdered and the over 200 who were taken hostage. It's that 85% of Palestinians in Judea and Samaria in the West Bank supported the attack on October 7th. 85%. Who are you making peace with? Now, what you need to do is have a process where you're de-radicalizing, just like you did with Germany in 1945 after you won a war, just like you did with Japan, where nobody thought anything good would come out of the Japanese. They thought, well, you're going to turn them into a democracy, in a freer society. We can actually, in the wake of an Israeli military victory, we can begin the process of de-radicalizing Palestinian society. And I'll tell you, Eric, we have partners, as you know, in this region who are doing that. The Emiratis have started to do it. The Saudis have started to do it. We need to have them as partners to de-radicalize Palestinian society. And when Palestinian society is being de-radicalized, that's when you should talk about what would a future peace settlement between Israelis and Palestinians look like. But for the world right now to say what we need in the wake of October 7th is irreversible steps towards a Palestinian state, that's absurd. It would be the greatest reward for terrorism in modern times. October 7th had nothing to do with the lack of a Palestinian state. Hamas effectively had a Palestinian state in Gaza. There were no Jews who were in Gaza. We were back on the 1967 lines, everything that the world says is critical to make peace. This had nothing to do with the lack of Palestinian state. It had everything to do with the presence of a Jewish state and the attempt to wipe it out. And unfortunately, it has to do with a poisoned society, with a deeply poisoned society. You know, there are other peoples who also have not achieved their political rights. Take the Kurds. There are people who I think deserve a state. Do you ever think in your mind that the Kurds could do what was done on October 7th? I'll tell you something else. The Jews, when we had not yet had our state, and in the 1940s, Jews were being murdered, 10,000 a day at Auschwitz. And there were debates among the Jewish community here in Israel. What should we do? Should we fight the British while this was happening? Because the British were closing the gates to this country as Jews were desperate to get in. Should we fight the British? Should we accommodate with the British who were fighting the Nazis? There were big debates. But you know what no one thought? Let's go to London. Let's blow up some buses. Let's rape a bunch of women. Let's burn babies alive. Nobody thought that because you don't have a poisoned society. If we do not de-radicalize Palestinian society, there is no hope for peace. The hope for me, Eric, is that a military victory can make the beginning of that process possible. And for the first time in 30 years, we can stop with the phony peace process and get to a real peace process by educating an entire generation of Palestinians to actually coexist with the Jewish state and not to try to destroy a Jewish state.
Minister, you mentioned the word earlier, unprecedented. I think on October 7th, we saw unprecedented levels of evil and depravity. Why should Americans care? Why should the average American care about what's happening in Israel right now and Israel's fight? And lastly, you and I have known each other for a long time. I've always known you to be a man of faith, number one, and number two, a great friend to the Christian community here in the U.S. and around the world. So why should Americans care? And what can Christians do right now to support Israel in its time of greatest need?
So first of all, why Americans should care is because we're in a battle right now between the forces of civilization and the forces of barbarism. And you do not want barbarism to win. If barbarism wins here, it will spread. It will spread to Europe, and it ultimately spreads to the United States. You know, what goes on in the Middle East doesn't unfortunately stay in the Middle East. You saw that on 9/11. That can happen again. And in Israel, you have a reliable ally in the heart of a region where you got a lot of fanatics running around, and we're the ones who are fighting that fight. A difference about Israel with some of your other partners and allies is you don't put American boots on the ground to defend us. We defend ourselves. And in a fundamental way, our victory in this war will be America's victory, because we are seen as your ally in this region. And when you stick with us to the end, you're going to strengthen American deterrence in the Middle East and beyond, because everybody should know that America sticks with Israel, sticks with its ally in the region, and sticks with it until the war is won and the forces of barbarism are defeated. That will ultimately bring the other partners that you have in the region closer to America, because the U.S.-Israel relationship is a litmus test for how America's allies around the world see how steady and reliable America is as a partner. Now, if America goes down the stretch as Israel's moving towards victory and abandons Israel, what message does it send to your other allies? What message does it send to your allies in the Middle East, in Asia, in Europe? Is America going to be there? Is it going to stay in the fight? Is it going to support those who are fighting themselves? So I think there are huge stakes for America. One thing I can tell you, Eric, with or without American support, and I was Israel's ambassador for 7.5 years, and I hope very much that America will stick it out till the end. But let me tell you something. We're going to win this war with or without the support of the United States, because we have no choice. This is an existential threat to our country, not because Hamas can wipe us out, because if we don't take that organization that did that on October 7th and end their rule in Gaza, it sends a message to all the buzzards who circle around Israel in the Middle East that this country has no future. And boy, this country has a brilliant future, and we're going to secure it. So we're going to win this thing. And I think as we come down the whole home stretch, the United States, who has been with us, standing by our side for 5 months, 5.5 months, despite a lot of political pressures, I implore President Biden and the Biden administration and the American Congress and the American people, stick with us down the home stretch, because then our victory will be your victory as well, and I think it will make a big difference. As for our Christian friends, millions of Christians friends throughout the United States, what I would ask you to do, in addition to praying for Israel, which you do, I know, every single day. Stand for Israel. Show your support for Israel, because you have the enemies of Israel are in the streets of America. And by the way, those enemies of Israel, and we'll discuss this maybe some other time, they're enemies of America. They have nothing good to say about America. Those people who are going through those streets talking about freeing Palestine from the river to the sea, ask them what they think about America. Ask them if America's a force for good. Ask them if they want a brilliant future for America, and they'll tell you no, they want to bring America down. So I will tell you, as you see all of these enemies of Israel in the streets, what I would ask devout Christians who support Israel throughout the United States, go out in the streets, stand up for Israel, hold those Israeli flags up high, and then show all the world that, in fact, Israel does not stand alone, that America stands with Israel, that the people of the United States stand with Israel, because that message is being lost because of these people who are going into the streets, who are screaming, who are going onto social media. But I know that in the heartland of America, there are tens of millions of people who stand with Israel. Go outside and stand with Israel.
Absolutely. Minister Ron Dermer, thank you so much for joining us. We truly appreciate it. Hey, God bless you. We'll see you back here again soon. Thank you, Minister.
Thank you.
Thanks again to Minister Ron Dermer for those great insights. Folks, again, if you want to see more content like this, be sure to tune in to Stakelbeck Tonight, my brand new show on TBN, every weeknight, Monday through Friday, 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time, and then again, 10:30 p.m. Eastern Time. We believe this is a show nightly for such a time as this. Perilous times, no doubt, but Bible times, and God Almighty, the God of Israel, is moving. Hey, thanks so much for joining us here today on the Watchman Newscast. Until tomorrow, God bless you. And remember, never hold your peace. Hey everyone, thanks for checking out the Watchman Newscast. Make sure you hit the subscribe button so you never miss an upload, and tap the bell icon so you're notified every time a new video is posted. And don't forget to share your thoughts, insights, and comments below. Thanks for watching. We'll see you back here tomorrow.